Today's miserymas video is dedicated, one, to my friend George. Here's some embarrassing pictures of us when we were tiny, and my perpetual commitment to being shoddy and admitting it on this channel. I made a video a while ago called Lies You're Told About School in Your 20s, or like it was things to unlearn in your 20s that you learnt at school. And while I stand by most of the stuff in this video, I also honour the experience of people who are currently working in schools. Obviously I was a student in schools, I think a lot about the school system and I've been through it, but the people who are currently working in the school system are also incredibly intelligent, interesting people and have sometimes a completely different perspective on the way schools function. So I did this interview with he's one of my best friends in the world, George, last year for Patreons that was going to be a podcast. However, the pandemic frazzled my brain and it wasn't a project I could really take on and continue with, so I no longer do the podcast at the moment. But I wanted to share this conversation with you because I think it's really interesting and we tackle some of the things that we see a little bit differently about education and stuff, and it was really interesting to hear George's perspective on these things and how it relates to the video that I'm talking about. If you want to watch the video first so you've got some context, it's up here right now. But without further ado, I want to introduce you to my wonderful friend George. He is a bona fide teacher and has been for some time. He's pretty fancy and high up, and we just had a really great discussion. I'd love to hear your thoughts on schooling in general and how you think schools can be cooler and kinder in the future, and what you maybe like about them now, what you hate about them now. But this is our conversation, and I really hope you enjoy it. Misery must commence. George Coles.
Hello.
Oh. Hello, nice to see you. So hi everyone, I'm joined by an actual real life teacher, Mr. Coles, who also happens to be one of my partners in I'm going to call it crime at school.
Okay.
Where we were both very gumption-filled students, with lots of life in us. We got some detentions. We took some names, we did a lot of good as well, and yeah, we were like best of friends at school and still are to this day. Would you say that's correct, Mr. Coles?
I would completely agree with that, yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Am I allowed to disclose that when we were teenagers we would be on the phone so much that George's family actually received a £200 bill
Yep.
from when he got told not to ring me anymore, so he used to ring me on my mobile, or you rang me anyway?
I think home phone to mobile when it was very expensive. Like
the days when it was like 13p for a text, so you had to like abbreviate your words. It was a different time indeed. But anyway, George, I recently made a video on lies you were told, things to unlearn in your, what was it called? Lies you learned at school to unlearn in your 20s. And I knew that you'd watch it because I was like waiting for my WhatsApp message, like my little thing, and it was like you'd sent me like 10 voice notes being like, here's the things I agree with, here are things I don't. And they were so interesting and I learned so much, because I think that we hang out a lot, but we don't often get into the nitty gritty of our jobs.
No, we don't talk shop.
We don't talk shop, no. It's all about the gin and giggles. But I learned a lot from a few of the voice notes you sent me, and I was like, this sounds a bit like a podcast. So I thought it'd be really interesting to basically go through and rip me a new one about my opinions on school, seeing as school isn't my profession, is something that we both experienced together. We went to the same school. But yeah, that's what we're going to be doing today. But first I wanted to just like ask you how you got into teaching. Obviously I know, but like for the willing public, and
yeah,
absolutely, about being a teacher.
So I trained as an actor straight after school. So I went to drama school, worked as an actor for a few years. I then left London, moved back to the Midlands, did some temping for a few years, ended up doing quite a lot of work in schools, sort of drama work, leading sort of theatre workshops. Really enjoyed it and thought, I want to get paid a bit more money for this. So I trained as a teacher, and I've been teaching for about 5.5 years now. So sort of trained as a drama teacher, worked as a drama teacher, became a head of drama, then became head of expressive art. So I led a drama, music and art department. That's what I currently do. And then I'm now, after Christmas, going to be starting as an assistant principal, looking after sort of teaching and staff development at a new school. So that's my sort of autobiography there.
Amazing. And it's, what do we call Derby up north?
You might call it up north. I'd call it the Midlands.
Still the Midlands.
But yeah. East Midlands.
Yeah.
So I'm always like really fascinated because I think there's like a phenomenon that maybe you won't experience because you are a teacher. Like imagining your school friends as teachers kind of like blows my actual mind. Like it makes me, it's kind of like, it's kind of like when a character in a different TV show makes a cameo in another TV show and you're like, wait, this can't, what's happening? So I'm really interested to hear like some of your thoughts on my points. I've got a list of them. We could just go through them if you want. But
Yeah.
I don't know if you can share any initial thoughts about what you felt when you saw my video.
It was really interesting to hear your video because obviously you're so busy as a teacher. You don't often sort of have that reflective stepping back and looking at, you know, your experience of school. And your video really made me think of my own school experience and reflect on it in a way that I don't think I'd done to that extent previously. And it was just interesting to hear also, I think, because that's the thing, lots of people, well, you know, most people have gone to school. And so everyone's got an opinion about school. Everyone is an expert, an educational expert, even if they've not sort of done any sort of academic work about education. And so it always interests me to hear about kind of people's perceptions, people's thoughts and feelings about schooling and their own schooling in particular. So I hoped you didn't think that my sort of feedback to you was, you know, I was really interested in what you had to say. And I disagreed with a few of the things that you said, but I hope you found me to be respectful.
No, I loved it. And I kind of related to that a little bit because obviously like I work in social media and everybody has an Instagram account.
Sure.
So I've had loads of experiences where I'm professionally running social media and then people are like, I actually have an Instagram account, so I think I've got and I'm like, oh my God, please no.
It's exactly the same thing. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So yeah, let's start because it's really interesting to go through them. So the first one I had was what homework teaches us about labour exchange and the work-life balance. So one of my points was that homework can encourage us not to have a good work-life balance in that it's acceptable for bosses to send you home with work, even though they're not like financially recuperating you for that work, which I think is like a massive problem. And then also the idea of like class privilege. So I have one parent that went to university and they can kind of, I did a music degree at a polytechnic, so I'm not sure if that counts, but like, you know, my parents could help me with homework and were very willing to, and were at home in the evenings to help me with homework. So I think that gave me a bit of a leg up in that respect. And I think that can accentuate class divides, and that's kind of the point I made in the video, which hopefully if you're watching this you have watched the video already. But yeah, how do you feel about that as a homework setter?
Absolutely.
As a creator of homework.
Oh, that's a nice way to describe me. I think actually, like with many things, homework can and is often done very badly, and when homework is delivered badly and set badly, it absolutely can perpetuate class divide. I think it's really important to think about what constitutes good homework. I mean, I think homework is important. Not loads of homework. It only has, you know, certain benefits. But I think homework can be fantastic for students. It can encourage them to develop their independence in their learning. But I agree with you. I think there's two main things that kind of can be difficult. The first one is provision to technology, and you know, it's kind of, yeah, we often assume that all students go home and they've got maybe somewhere to work, a computer to work with, and that's simply not the case. In a lot of schools, in a lot of areas, there might be kind of one device, maybe it's a phone in the kind of that, or an iPad that can be used by the family. So it's not reasonable for us to expect that students can go home and go into their study and go onto their laptop and do some research. So I think that's the first thing, is we need to think about setting homework that doesn't actually sort of perpetuate the social inequality in terms of tech. But and also,
do you get training on that in teacher training, or is it just kind of like set homework, good luck?
Yeah, I don't remember discussing it in teacher training. It's kind of more something I've reflected on, and there's a lot of discussion about this within sort of the educational world more recently. But actually, we need to think about what provision we have, and that's been particularly challenging in light of COVID, where suddenly the whole sector had to kind of scale up at home working and schooling at home within kind of a weekend's notice. So that was a huge challenge. And we have to be really careful about what we set. The second thing is also, you know, what are your parents' experiences? A lot of students don't have parents who I mean, you know, if I don't have children, but if I did and they asked me for help with maths or science homework, they'd be at a real disadvantage because I know nothing. You know,
RIP to them.
yeah. So I can help them with their English and their drama and maybe their humanities homework, but I would really struggle with that. And I'm an educated person. Some parents might not have the necessary level of education to help to reteach their students, their children, sorry. And also some parents might not talk English as a first language, so that can, you know, perpetuate inequality as well. So we need to think about setting homework that doesn't require the parent to be a teacher, because that's not their job. They're parents, they're not teachers, and a parent should support the instruction of the teacher, but they shouldn't be expected to be instructors themselves. That's not their job. And if they could do that, then we wouldn't need teachers. So I think actually good homework should be about consolidating sort of the knowledge that's been learned in school and going over and kind of just going over with what's been done in the day. I mean, sometimes people like to set homework where the students are learning new things and then they're going into school, but actually I would prefer my students to learn new things with me as the expert in the classroom rather than at home where they've all got a different provision. And also some students just never do homework. Some students just never do any homework. I've got students that I've taught for 5 years and I don't think they've ever submitted homework to me. So we have to be quite realistic with our expectations. And that's not to say we shouldn't have high expectations, but we have to be realistic about that. I think your the first point you made was actually about, are we creating a kind of unrealistic expectations in terms of workload? I think we just have to be careful there and sort of ensure that we're not setting too much. So, and I think depending on the age of the student, then that should kind of relate to how old they are. If they're in GCSEs, year 11, year 10, I think it's reasonable to expect them to do 40 minutes, an hour homework a day. But at year 7, I think, no, let them go outside.
Yeah, I think it's the thing of like, even in your professional life, there will be moments in the year or like maybe a year of your professional life where you really do have to push yourself and you have to like live it and breathe it and all of this. But like I guess it's like if you set that expectation at every level, then people are always firing on like 150 cylinders. Is it hard?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Things are being fired.
Something sciencey.
Yeah, and it's science. There's no peaks and troughs to that, and like I think there is, like, you should train people to work hard at certain points in their life, but to expect them to work at 110% every year. But yeah, you're right.
Sustainable.
It's about not. Maybe it isn't about like, it's about the kind of like, it's not all homework is created equal, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're right.
There's a spectrum.
Completely.
So yeah, that makes sense. And it's really interesting as well, because obviously like if that isn't something that's addressed in teacher training like consistently, it means that somebody like you who thinks about class issues and different like home issues and would consider like how they set homework and how that might affect the child, but somebody who's grown up in an incredibly privileged background, who has always had technology in the house, who has always had like very clever parents who are very free to help them with it, might not actually consider that. So I guess it does depend.
Completely. And I don't know if you remember when we were at school together in year 7 in history, we were set this homework where we had for history, where we had to build a castle or a monastery. And do you remember that? Flashbacks.
Yeah.
And I think for me, like looking back on that, it's a little bit problematic when you've got sort of affluent middle class kids that are coming in with beautiful papier-mâché models, and then you've got
like real trees and like
completely. And it was just not possible for some of the students. And my first complaint about that is, number one, what the heck is the student learning about history? Absolutely nothing. And number two, it's just not necessary. And I think it's always well intentioned, and I think it's often the teacher wanting to do something exciting and positive for the student, but you need to think about these things.
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. Number 2, I said, why uniforms are a con. God, I'm such like a newspaper editor, aren't I? I'm like, what, 10 reasons why? And I talked about the gender split, so how it might be hard for people who don't feel like they fit into either gender, and also the kind of sexism that comes along with like certain types of outfits for girls that can be more revealing for some very weird reason. And then stuff to do with religion, self-harm scars, body types and how they suit, and like why uniforms might not always be the best idea. And then I was also kind of talking about the idea of like, if we know that there's somebody in a class who will discriminate against somebody else because of their parents' income, we shouldn't be trying to hide that kind of behavior by making other students like adapt their own appearance to it. We should be dealing with the child
The
who
root
would,
cause.
with somebody who would bully somebody on the basis of their income.
Yeah.
I know you're a fan of uniforms, so tell me why you love it.
You know what? I like to look fabulous for work. I like my suit.
I can imagine.
I like to be smart, and I like my students to look smart as well. I've worked in schools without uniforms and schools with uniforms. And kind of you, in your video, you spoke about the fact that uniforms are often promoted because they're a social leveler. You don't know someone's social background, maybe if they've got expensive or less expensive clothes on. So it can be good in that. And you sort of criticized and said, well, students will find other ways to rank themselves. They'll look at PE kit or footwear or bags or stationery. I get that, but I think by and large, uniform, it definitely is a social leveler, and it does create a sense of community that I think is very powerful. And actually, to a certain extent, in society, in wider society, there are expectations in terms of dress and how we dress, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is probably another video. But I take on board some of your points. I do think that we need to think about uniform in terms of the gender aspect of uniforms, and I think a good uniform, you know, I would like to run my own school one day, and I'd like to have a uniform that is as inclusive as it can be. There's no reason why it shouldn't be. This bizarre obsession we have with categorizing people, is a little bit strange for me, and I don't get that. I think another thing to think about is school uniform has to be affordable, and it's not on when it's expensive. And you see people on social media sometimes talk about spending hundreds of pounds on uniform, and it's just not possible if they're, only earning the living wage or what. So that's something to think about. But what I'd say is a lot of schools are really working hard to make sure that uniform is affordable. And a lot of schools are giving away uniform for free because they're saying, do you know what? They're saying we've got high expectations. We want our students to look immaculate. So we're going to give you a uniform. We're going to stop giving you an excuse to say that you've not got it for whatever reason. Here you go. And I think that's great, actually. Schools, they don't get loads of money, as you know, but they do have funds, and schools in more disadvantaged areas do carry certain financial, their premiums there. So I think it's a great way to use money, and I think it's something practical we can do to support our students. Yeah. I know what you mean. I think when I started teaching, I was very sort of, uniform, it's oppressing students, it's stopping them from being individual. And then I think just, I'm not going to say I don't think like that, but I think you seeing it in practice, you go, actually, no, it's not oppressing kids. It's not controlling them. I've got some friends, and they say, it starts this kind of sense of control, and I don't think it does that.
That's
but
society.
I think we need to,
I think the danger in stuff in my videos, I'm kind of, and I acknowledge it a little bit, I'm kind of like, is this just society, or is this schools, or is this,
Yeah, but it's a reasonable question, because I think schools do, and the education system does perpetuate some of these societal expectations. I think a school is very much often a microcosm of society. So it's interesting for us to investigate kind of what it's doing, and these things that we sometimes maybe don't give a lot of thought to, thinking about actually what sort of message is that conveying, what subliminal message is that conveying to a young person, an impressionable young person.
Without giving away where we went, our school uniform isn't something that you could just buy in any shop. Like, they were specific colours or specific designs, or they had specific stuff on them that meant that you couldn't just like walk into Primark and buy like a white shirt. You had to and ours was a comprehensive school. It was supposed to be somewhere where anybody was welcome. It wasn't fee paying. So that's why I guess it was weird. But you're right. I think, again, it's kind of like homework. It's like, not all uniform is created equal.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. But certainly at our school, it was, I'd like to think we've moved on. I mean, we were at school a while ago now. So I think society's moved on, education's moved on, schools have moved on. So I think we're in a better, we're not there, we're certainly not there, but we're moving in the right direction, I hope.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that. It reminded me, it was always really weird when we got told at school that it was like, or maybe you do tell this to your students, like, when you're out of school but you're wearing uniform, like, you represent the school, so you better watch out. Like, you can't. And I'm like, why should I have to represent the school in my spare time just because I haven't had time to go home and change?
Yeah, I don't know.
But if you didn't have uniform, you wouldn't have to worry about that. You could be like, don't worry about your reputation, mate.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we do at school, though, is we're like preparing we're not just academically preparing students, but we're preparing future citizens to, you know, help create a better society. So you want to think about them just kind of, I don't know, we say some things and we use a lot of theatrical language when we're talking to young people. And sometimes that's just kind of because we heard our teacher say that to us.
Yeah.
But it's good to think about that. I will certainly reflect on that next time I tell a student that they're
Representing the school.
Representing the school, yeah.
Represent. So the third one was the curriculum is biased. I think you kind of agreed with me on that, but I think again it's changed a lot since we were at school because we're f***ing old.
The whole time I've been teaching, there's been a real debate about curriculum. Then in 2019, Ofsted changed the inspection framework. So you know about Ofsted, right? And
yeah. But there was a big bad wolf. It was just more like they'd always use Ofsted, like Ofsted are coming, so you better be careful. I was like, aren't they judging you, sir, not me?
That's true.
Yeah.
No, there. So the big drive from Ofsted from 2019 has been curriculum, which has been really good in my opinion. I mean, a lot of people don't dislike Ofsted. I think the new Ofsted framework is great. I think it's very academically sound. I think it's very evidence and research based. But there's a lot of discussion about curriculum, so the content of what we teach students, and this has sort of provoked a lot of discussions in schools, in departments, with teachers about kind of what do we teach students and what does that say about us and our society and our history and who we want to be and how we define ourselves. I mean, there's lots of language which makes me a little bit uncomfortable, like this idea of like British values and things. Like what does that mean? I think that's a Department for Education phrase. But yeah, so curriculum's been a hot topic, and then particularly obviously with the Black Lives Matter movement, and obviously that's gained a lot of momentum over the past sort of 6 months. That has kind of then taken this debate about curriculum even further. But I do think a lot of discussion is happening, a lot of work is happening. It's not necessarily happening at the top, but it's happening in schools. And it's happening among teachers, and I contribute quite a lot to EduTwitter, which is a very
Can you explain what EduTwitter is for people who
I can. It's a small proportion of teachers and school leaders and educationalists who are passionate about education and will debate every educational issue constantly. It's great fun. So I like to blog and I like to tweet every now and again, but I kind of read other people's stuff more so than contribute myself. But it's really great because it's kind of a professional environment where people are discussing about kind of what we teach and how we teach. And there's always disagreements on absolutely every topic, as you can imagine. And I think education is always such a sort of contentious topic to discuss. But broadly, the consensus is that actually, you know what, that our curriculum should be reflective of our society. And we should talk about things about in the past, and we should address some things that make us uncomfortable from the past. But we should also think about what we want to do as a society. And I think you often think about that in school. You think about, we're raising future citizens. What do we want citizens to look like and to be like? And so there's a lot of debate at the moment. And I think that's positive debate. It's good debate. It was happening already, but it's happening a lot more now. And I think we just need more of it and more questions. And some things need to change. Some things don't need to change. But it's just good to keep that dialogue going and learning and being humble and saying, do you know what, I got it wrong. Again, like I've said, a lot of the time things are well-intentioned, but we make mistakes.
Definitely. I think for me, it's like encouraging to see, and I only see glimpses of Twitter through your Twitter account for when you retweet stuff, but like it's encouraging that I'm like imagine if some of those teachers we had at school were like actively like publicly debating the idea of school and like really genuinely thinking about it with teachers all over the country, because I just doubt that they were, or they had the technology to do that when we were at school.
And all over the world, it's really interesting. Like EduTwitter is very popular in the UK, but I mean, I talk to teachers in Australia, in America, the Netherlands, Dubai, all over Canada. So cool. So it's really interesting to kind of compare our debate and compare our approach, but also to work through ideas and stuff. So yeah, it's I think that's a real positive.
Do you think that like some teachers do have to some extent have control over the curriculum? Like, is there room for personalization? So if even though that like the like national curriculum doesn't understand the importance of, say, the education on Black Lives Matter in the UK, like if a history teacher really took it upon themselves and was like, I understand why this is important, would they have the freedom to be able to teach that? Do you know?
So a real misconception, this might blow your mind, but a lot of schools don't teach the national curriculum in this country because of how the school... No, because you don't have to. Some schools...
Okay.
No, but...
I was like, oh my God, give them detention.
No, so the way that schools are set up now, a lot of schools don't have, you can set your own curriculum. So people think they talk about... I mean, I used to get angry about the fact that drama, my subject, my love, my art form, is not on the national curriculum. And people say, George, why do you care? Like, loads of schools don't teach the national curriculum. Don't worry about that. It's kind of... I think, the national curriculum is important because I think even if schools aren't teaching the national curriculum, they look to it as a sort of centralized idea of what we think the curriculum might be or should be. But yeah, I do think even within the curriculum, there's so much flexibility. So if you think about, let's say you're an English teacher, there's content that you have to cover, but there's so much freedom there in terms of like, the novels that you teach, the poetry that you teach, the plays that you teach. There is an immense amount of sort of personalization. So I think there's more than people actually think, and and that's good because I think it's important that students are exposed to kind of some of the core knowledge, and there is sort of this general core knowledge that we all have. But at the same time, you've got to remember teachers are experts. They might have focused on something and, an aspect of literature at university, and they might be really passionate about that and therefore really good at teaching that. So it makes sense for their students to benefit from that as well. So I do think within the humanities and the arts and English and stuff, English literature, there is certainly a sense of you can personalize what you teach.
Yeah, so I suppose it's not just about being like, you should put this on the national curriculum. It's also about like empowering on a teacher level, people feel confident enough to teach it and giving them the resources to teach it. And I guess also maybe it's a trickle down thing. It's like once we start changing or like encouraging more diversity in the way we teach at university, that's going to impact the school system. That's interesting.
Yeah, but I think generally teachers are clever people. They're well-educated people, and they have the best interests for their students most of the time. So there's this constant kind of dialogue and discussion, which I think is really good. It's really encouraging, actually.
Yeah, and I always really feel for teachers because I know they don't get paid enough. So I'm always like, oh geez, I'm like, could you just reimagine what civilization could be and then teach it to our children so that we like them more?
Yeah.
It's like, oh good, for like 20 grand a year, sure, I'm on it. Okay, this one was interesting. Number 4, the structure of a day with your focus was my very eloquent and educated way of phrasing that.
Yeah.
So my argument was that like switching subjects all the time, switching classrooms all the time doesn't suit a lot of learners. And there is, I guess, like the articles I was reading was more around like the dangers of social media and like how being constantly distracted by notifications and being brought out of your deep focus work can like fundamentally alter the way your brain works and like with your productivity. But who knows if those two things are connected? I just made it up.
I disagreed with you in a big way on this one.
Yeah, I know.
Because with the greatest respect, and you can please tell me if I'm being disrespectful here, I wouldn't suggest that you were ever a typical student at school.
Yeah.
You were hardworking most of the time. You were intelligent.
And I thought you were going to be like, you weren't the normal student, a bit boisterous.
Well, I don't think you were all the time. You definitely had a naughty streak to you. But I think you wanted to do well, and you were. I would say you were academically talented, more so than I was. I feel like education came. I don't know. This is my perception. I've never really discussed this with you. I feel as though education came to you easier than it did to me. Would you? I mean, I'm not.
I think maybe if I was going to say the way we worked together, I think tick boxing came easier to me, which is part of education and getting through the stuff. So you'd be like, I've got this amazing idea, and I'd be like, but how do we fit that in with the objectives that means that we'll be marked well, you know?
Yes.
So I think like you were very talented as well, but I think maybe I might know how to pass an exam more, because but that's just also what you choose to focus on.
That's interesting, because that's a sort of cognitive strength in itself that you possess there.
But it might mean I also missed out on your big ideas, you know, because you were the person who were like, let's do this huge thing, and like, you know, you're like, you weren't missing much. I think there's different ways that we worked, basically.
Okay, yeah, but I mean, what I'm thinking of is my own students. If I had to teach my year 9 class for 5 hours in their drama group on a day, I'd struggle to get along with them. And I love all my students, as you know. But I think actually students, particularly younger students, sort of year 11 and below, they benefit from, here's a bit of maths. Okay, let's move you. Here's a bit of English. Let's keep you going. So I think for lots of them, it actually helps them to concentrate and to focus. But more than that, the thing that really interested me was I was explaining to you this idea of like spaced practice. And it's this idea of actually, if you move from one subject to another subject to another subject, it actually helps you to learn things and to retain information better. And essentially, if we think about learning as being sort of remembering things and putting knowledge into your long-term memory, that's kind of a sort of generic definition of learning, then actually we need to think as teachers about how can we get this information into your head better. So even though you probably thought, flipping egg, I've just got my, you know, I've been in science for an hour, now I'm in maths for an hour, but actually in having that spaced practice, it's better rather than massed practice where you're kind of cramming a subject a day. And if you think about, like, I don't know what you were like in terms of revising for your GCSEs and A-levels and university. Were you a reviser?
I did the due amount. I didn't go overboard. I did.
Okay.
I did the bare minimum and then a little bit more.
But okay, that's good to know. But yeah, we kind of advise students to sort of, rather than revising just one thing for a week, you know, do all your chemistry revision, you'd actually split it up and go from one thing to another thing, back to another thing. Students hate doing that because it's tiring, and it does play sort of it makes you think, it makes you work harder and think harder. But actually thinking harder and having your brain ticking over more is actually just sort of saving that information into your brain better, and it's sticking there, and it gives you that sort of that sticking power that's just going to help you to remember that in the future. Because that's why we learn things, right? Is so we can use knowledge and apply it to different contexts in the future, whether that's an exam, whether that's just sort of real life. So even though you probably weren't fond of that, I'm going to say it was probably good for you.
I like, my mind's actually a bit blown, because you're probably right, because like I went to university and then into an office environment, and I noticed that I was working a lot better at university because I was doing long amounts of deep focus on one thing. But actually maybe I was only able to do that because school trained me to be able to retain information fast. I don't know.
Yes, yeah, it does.
And it's the thing that's like, oh, I must have always been like this. And I'm like, actually, maybe the reason I'm good at deep focus is because of the slow bursts that you learn at school that train you up into a way that you can.
I mean, I'm absolutely not a cognitive scientist or a psychologist, but I do struggle to understand a lot of this. But from the reading I've done, it is really interesting. And I think to myself, flipping heck, if I'd have known more about this and known about actually how people learn and stuff when I was at school, I might have been able to help myself a bit more. And I think actually as teachers, we really need to go, how can we help them to learn in a way that's really efficient so they can get, you know, that's what we want to do, right? Is we want to just teach you as much as you can so you can go out into the world and kind of have that knowledge. I mean, that's a really empowering thing to do. That's why most of us want to teach, because we want to teach you stuff that we care about.
I want you to be my teacher. Can I go back, please?
You what? Sorry.
I want you to be my teacher. I want to go back.
I'll tell you what. Give me a little. Give me some money, and I'll give you a special.
Oh my god! Yeah.
I'll do for the school.
Why pay a therapist? I'll just pay a teacher.
Hey,
It's also interesting because like one of my arguments in the video that I was just like, oh well, when I got home I was really tired, like that those kind of days really exhausted me, and actually you're saying that's kind of a good, that probably means that it was working.
Also, I will say this, like when I started teaching, I always hated, I'll be honest with you, I hate getting up early in the morning. That's why I chose to be an actor. I like to lie in. I like to go to bed at 4 a.m, you know me. And I like to get up in the afternoon. I still struggle now. I struggle getting up early, and I was thinking, flipping heck, maybe we should campaign and like have the school day start later and like finish later, and that'd be really good. And some like people say, yeah, it's really good. You know, teenagers need sleep. Let them sleep in a bit longer. It will help them. But actually, do you know what? They would just be playing Call of Duty or on their PlayStation later. I'm thinking to myself, you know, what sort of sleep were you getting as a teenager? Because you need a lot. And I certainly didn't get enough sleep, and my, you know, the students I work with now, sometimes they try and, you know, fall asleep in your lessons, but yeah, it's tiring.
Yeah, it's tiring to teach as well as to be taught, I think. So the other one, oh my god, we've only got to, what are we on? We're only on number 4. This is too fun.
I'll talk fast.
I know. Gifted and talented. I think we both, that's not really as much of a thing as it was in our day.
It sometimes rears its ugly head under different names, but I think it's just a really weird thing actually. And like, do you know what? Let's have high expectations of all students. Let's give, you know, like at our school, the gifted and talented students would go, you know, be shipped off to go and do Latin lessons. Do you know what? Imagine giving everyone Latin lessons.
Yeah,
like think about that. Why should we limit opportunities for those who are already further on? It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah,
high expectations of everyone. So yeah, the idea of gifted and talented and giving special privileges to people who have, you know, I find it problematic, and it makes me uncomfortable.
I think I have a theory about the reason why is because, like, if you have a comprehensive school that has a certain number of students who get into Oxbridge, you'll get more funding. That's my theory, but I don't know if that's true. But I think that maybe it's a school reputation thing where it's like, let's pool all our resources into a few amount of students because it will mean that they go to Oxbridge, and then we'll get more funding eventually. And
I don't know if they would get funding. I don't know if they would get funding. No, I've not heard of that before.
Maybe it's just a good way of getting people in. I don't know. It'd be good maybe it's good to put on the prospectus.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good for the PR of the school, and it's a little bit of homework I shall do for you.
Oh, thank you, because I wouldn't even know how to Google that. You know, and I'm like, I know that we have Google and limited knowledge to stuff, but I just don't even know how to. Anyway, number 6, the weird world of merits and detention. So what my argument was that I think that having extra external validation as in a merit system on top of your grades is really weird, because you mix the idea of academic success with behavioural success. So you could get a merit in our school for either one, and once you got to the end of the year, it didn't differentiate between a behavioural merit and a like academic achievement merit. So people who were really clever could get loads of merits without actually having been very well behaved. And there's also loads of like social factors in what you judge as good behavior, because there's obviously like people who have ADHD, people who don't, people who have different home lives, and what we perceive as good or bad behavior is quite subjective, and can also be can open up to, obviously not you, but other teachers who have like internal biases to do with loads
we
of
all do. I do
identities. Yeah, exactly. So do you have a merit system at your school?
Okay, I'm going to be really careful here, because this will open, and when you talk about behaviour in education, it's opening up a can of excitable worms. Okay, so I'm going to try and be really succinct and try and not go into it in too much detail. The first thing I would say is I believe passionately, and I've said this to you before many times, our pupils are so lucky. They get to go to these amazing schools with passionate teachers who are highly educated, who are subject experts. That is such a privilege, and I think that actually we need to say to our young people, that's a reward. That is a reward in itself. I'm teaching you. I say to my students, your reward for being here is having this in front of you. So sit down, shut up, and enjoy the show, sort of thing. But we do have, and to be fair, in the past, I've sort of rallied against this idea of extrinsic motivation and motivating students with, you know, we have behavior points. So if students are good, they get a point up, sort of thing. If they're bad, they get a point down. Now, I think it's really important that doesn't get crossed over with attainment. Attainment is what we achieve through the GCSEs, the qualifications we get, the satisfaction of achieving something and learning something that we didn't know before. With behavior, I've kind of moved on this slightly. I mean, I'm quite a strict teacher, and I don't set a great deal of detentions because I'm fortunate in that students often don't get to the point in a lesson where I'd need to escalate it that far. However, I'll be working at a new school soon. Students don't know me, so I might have to set detentions more readily because I need to kind of set my expectations. I think it's important to think that actually in society we have consequences. You know, if you do something that's wrong, you're going to get in trouble for it, whatever that might be, whether that's a criminal thing or sort of a social thing. So I think it's good to say, listen, if you do something wrong, there will be punishment for that. And I do, you know, I used to not use the word punishment because I thought it sounds quite an authoritarian word. But again, I think no, because you are in life, you're punished, not necessarily legally, but if you get things wrong, you experience a punishment of some degree, whether that's a social punishment or whatever. So I think we have to be careful, and I think we have to use our knowledge of students, our knowledge of young people, our knowledge of how to motivate them. But yeah, I like to kind of be quite, I don't necessarily, you know, I like to have quite simple rules in terms of behave yourself, listen to me when I'm talking, listen to each other, be respectful, keep it nice and simple. And I think that's something that everyone can abide by, regardless of who you are or your background. And I think we have to be really careful not to lower our expectations and say, this student's, you know, oh, they've got a difficult home life, so they can kind of do what they want, because that's not helping that student. I think that we think it is, and particularly as educators, we're often sort of liberal-minded, progressive people, and we think, oh, we'll turn a blind eye to their behaviour because they're having a bad day. But actually, that's not going to help them in the long run. We need to treat students equally. So I'm kind of probably going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I think, I don't think we need to cross ability and attainment and behaviour. I think we need to separate them.
And I think also this is showing, like, obviously we have slightly different like professional experiences, but also that I'm somebody who's like, let's prepare the young people for a socialist future where everything's going to be really great and everyone's and it's like, no, your duty is also to prepare them for the world that is currently here. And you know, because like I'm kind of like, abolish prisons, let's just all like hug people who do things wrong. I feel like that's not the world that we live in.
No,
like,
and to be fair, sorry, I'm just going to put a bit more light on.
It's getting dark, isn't it?
Have you come across a play called Our Country's Good?
I've heard of it, and I think that you talked to me about it.
I've probably spoken to you about it. Basically, it kind of looks at the idea of do we punish prisoners or do we rehabilitate them? And it kind of that's the sort of the central debate in the play. And I think it relates a lot to how we work with young people, how we treat students. You know, do we punish them? Do we rehabilitate them? And I think it's very easy, particularly when you're kind of, I would say when I was a younger teacher, to have this kind of view of, you know, oh, well, a student can do something wrong, but, you know, let's try. Yeah, of course, we have to rehabilitate people. But before that, we need to make students aware of the consequences of their actions.
Yeah, so it's not either or.
It's not either or. I think they you know, and some people often in sort of educational debate, ideas are put on a binary, and I think actually we need to think there's a lot more nuance to it than that. So I think it's important to weigh that up, really. Yeah,
definitely. The other one was making people play sports. It's not the same thing as adequate physical education, which you know from witnessing my life in PE.
Yeah, I mean,
that I have vested interest in this one. But you did a lot of dance at school as well, so I think you kind of were probably hated PE as well, but like you found a way out of that yourself and were like, I'm going to do some dance.
Well, I don't know if you remember, I mean, we were in different sides of the year, but I was not the best behaved student when it came to PE. I sometimes would slink off and hide in the bushes, or go and pretend I had a clarinet lesson and go and sit in the toilets and things. So I wasn't a perfect student. No. But do you know what? I look back with mixed feelings, because part of me thinks, flipping heck, like I found a lot of my PE lessons a little bit traumatic. I wouldn't say I was overweight, but I wasn't skinny as a young person either, and having to go out onto the rugby field and take the rugby top off and turn it round and kind of being really self-conscious.
Did you take the rugby top off?
Because there was like a blue strip for one side of the team and a red and a yellow strip for the other. And if you had to be on the other team, you had to change your top. And I found that really awkward and embarrassing.
The girls did not have to do that.
No, but I found it really uncomfortable, and like the idea of just, you know, even getting changed in front of people, and I found it really uncomfortable. And I look back at that and I think, well, I got on with it, I got through it, so maybe we should just expect that. But maybe there's other things we can do differently. I know at my school, for example, fitness is kind of really a core part of PE today, and so it's not just about sports, but you know, I never found a sport that I was good at or enjoyed, unfortunately. I do like to move myself around. I like to dance, and I sometimes got away by, you know, just going into the girls' lesson and doing a bit of aerobics and stuff. But, you know, most people probably wouldn't have the guts to go and do that.
Yeah, you had a lot of guts at school. You were just like, F this, I'm going to go find the girls.
Yeah.
And it's also probably interesting as well, like how it interacts with like toxic masculinity and like, because we didn't have that, like, no, like there were girls that cared about winning, but like it was okay to be like, PE is whereas I think with boys, it was more like, you know, you had to win.
If you weren't good at football or rugby, then, you know, you weren't worth knowing. And I think that was difficult. That was difficult for me. But, you know, I'm a drama teacher. You forget how many students, I'll meet them and they'll say, sir, I really don't want to perform. And they get this real sense of stress and anxiety about the idea of having to perform in front of their classmates. And I always say to them, listen, I'm not going to force you to do anything. Like, it's not beneficial to me, but I would encourage you to really try and push yourself, because I think it's going to be really good for you. And if you can stand up and talk in front of the class, you're going to feel amazing about it. I'm not going to force you to do it. Now, other teachers would disagree with me and say, do you know what? You have to force them. I just think you don't get the best out of people. The more you push them, the more they kind of close in on themselves. And I think in the same with all, you know, I just think we need to think about how we motivate people to do things. And I just think by forcing them into doing something that actually is making them cry because they're so stressed about it, it's a waste of time. Not the one. No.
Definitely not. Number 8. No allowance for personal autonomy after abuse. Teachers' bad boundary setting. So I was using an example of like, and I think I probably didn't like say this properly in the video because we chatted about it afterwards, and I was like, no, this is what I kind of meant, was like, There's a lot of like physical violence in schools. So there's a lot of kids in like our year who got beat up by other kids in the class, like physically beaten up, like really horrible stuff. And they'd have to then still be in the class with that person like forever and a day. And there was no question of like, oh, I'd like to move forms because this person like has physically abused me. Because again, at school, we used to use very like soft language. So we'd say like, well, it's not really soft, but like, oh, they got battered, or like, oh yeah, they got beaten up a bit. You know, when actually it's like, as an adult, you don't say, oh, this guy like beat me up a bit. You go like, I have been abused and I would like to report this to the police. And whereas at school, there's lots of like physical violence that doesn't get punished by the police, but then it like, and I worry that as an adult, you don't feel like, some people might be made to feel like they can't get out of situations because at school we're taught that there isn't really like, I don't know, do you know what I'm saying? It's not the same repercussions.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Do you know what's interesting? We went to what one might describe as a very good school. But flipping heck, I remember fights and scraps and things all the time there. I'd really like to think that schools have massively moved on. There are clearly, you know, in every school, there's going to be instances of, you know, really poor behavior that results in, you know, physical violence. But I think from my experience, it's far less prevalent than it was maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago. Because I think people don't, you know, we clamp down on that a lot sooner and we say, no, that's absolutely not.
I guess
I'd agree with you.
It makes us sound really old, but like we came from the generation where it was like kind of okay to smack your kids.
Absolutely.
Like a weird, whereas like now that's not, I don't know. Things have really like moved on quite drastically.
Very quickly, yeah. But I agree with you. I think like if I had a student and they had been assaulted by another student, I wouldn't want that student to have to be in that space, because that's really triggering for that student actually. And I think that's wrong. And I think we need to think about if that does happen, which I'm sure it does, that needs to be addressed. And I'd agree with you. And I think it does set a really dangerous precedent of kind of, you have to just accept this, because you wouldn't have to accept that in life, or you shouldn't have to accept that in the workplace or in general society.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like there is like I think in the video it wasn't quite clear enough, because I think it's like, I don't agree that if you fall out with somebody you shouldn't have to share a space with them ever again.
Yeah,
I think that's there is like a line where it's like there is a certain extent to which you do have to live alongside people that you don't like and you have had arguments with before. And
I've had students, sort of younger students, come to me and say, "Oh, sir, I can't work with them. I can't sit with them." And I just say, "Get a grip, sit yourself down." And
yeah, like, I'm not going to work with my ex-boyfriend ever again. And it's like,
yeah. And I think that's what I initially thought you were getting at. But then when when you elaborated on your point, I was like, "Oh my gosh, no, absolutely, I completely agree with you."
Yeah, but I think there's a very nuanced line that depends on the situation, because and
absolutely.
I think also maybe there's a thing where we're adults that we cut out people too fast, because we can just like ghost somebody, like never speak to somebody again once you've broken up with them, never and
block them on social media.
And I think there's a degree to which, because we don't live in like small villages where we live there forever, like we can just move away from people too fast, I think, and not reconcile. Not to sound too like reconciliation, guys, is what we need. So yeah, I think we do agree on that one, but obviously like I don't have the experience of working with teenagers, so I just don't know. And then the last one is discourages self-guided fulfillment and creates, what's this? Oh right, so this is like at our school and with the teachers that I had, once you'd finished your work, you weren't allowed to then go and work on a project or do something. And a lot of the logistics of school, again to do with funding, means that you're hanging around a lot trying to find a room that's free, like because there was too many kids in our school, and many it was like there's too many kids for the amount of classrooms that you have, and the classes kept getting bigger but the classrooms didn't expand. So it's always like moving rooms all the time, waiting on teachers, waiting on things to happen. And like there were a lot of spaces in the day, whether it was within the classroom or like outside the classroom, where we weren't allowed to use your own like resources to entertain yourself or do your own stuff, to like educate yourself, do your own stuff or work on your own projects, which created an environment where I think it accentuated the human tendency for gossip and like, oh, I've got it, like really obsessed with other people's stuff, which now I see manifest in like Love Island and like things where it's like, I want to know what's going on with the drama on Twitter. And like I think, and again, I think that isn't, you can't really blame that on school completely, because that's human nature and people not being cared for properly and like having to like obsess about other people. But I think there was so much like gossip culture at school that I was like, if we'd have had a better way of putting that
better outlet,
but I guess drama does that, because you help people like tell stories and like it's just like, oh, you want to invent some gossip about people, why don't you just write a play?
I would say you can certainly say that we need to think about the funding issues of, you know, in terms of ratio, class sizes, room sizes is an important thing to think about. But also as a teacher myself, I want to limit opportunity for students to just be out there bored, flailing, kind of done, you know. If you're a hard-working student that has completed the work, you shouldn't be then sat for 10 minutes waiting for people to catch up with you. I would say that's a poor lesson, and it's poorly planned. That's not effective instruction, because I want you to be working, thinking, doing something the whole time of the lesson. So I think a lot of that can be down to lessons not being planned well. And I think also this idea of how we play, because hey, you're in a class, you've got different abilities, right? So you've got people who are going to find the work really easy, people who are going to find it a bit harder. I think when we were at school, it was very much a tendency of, you know, well, if you struggle, do this thing. If you find it a bit easier, do that. Or here's an extension task, do an extra 3 questions. There was more of that culture, whereas I think the culture in classrooms has changed a lot recently. And it's about kind of, this is the work, this is really hard work, we expect everyone to do it. But if you struggle, we're going to give you a little bit more support. So I think this idea of students being held back because they were too, they progressed too quickly, I'd like to think that happens less. And I'd like to think that instructional quality and teaching has improved to an extent that we don't have students sat down for 15 minutes waiting for the task to end. I mean, that does happen sometimes. And you'll sometimes catch yourself saying, right, just check your work then, do another one, write it again. That does happen, and you get that in the kind of ebb and flow of teaching a large range of abilities. But if we can try and reduce those moments where we're wasting time, because I only see my Key Stage 3 classes for an hour a week. So I want to make sure that when they're with me, we're getting through as much as we possibly can, and they're working hard, and they come out of the lesson going, oh yeah, I've worked then. That's what we want. So I think, but at the same time, I think we can definitely do things to encourage students to follow their own sort of academic or intellectual impulses. I think we can, I know a lot of schools now give sort of, like in university, you have reading lists. So at my school, the sort of literacy coordinator took each subject and said, right, give us 6 or 7 books that you can read at this age group that relate to your subject. So if a student just absolutely loves drama, they can go and go, oh, let's look at this, the Empty Space by Peter Brook. Let's look at this in more detail. So it's encouraging a kind of more sort of criticality and academic engagement with the work. And I think that's really a great thing to do to kind of help students to self-regulate and give them more challenge as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're making me very hopeful about it, because I think as well it's easy to be like, oh, that's just how school is. And it's like, no, that's how school was between the years of 2000 and 2010. No, when were we at school?
2001 to 2008.
Oh, very good. Yeah. Which is a very specific period in time and in a very specific city. And like education is obviously changing, hopefully for the better.
I hope so.
But yeah. Cool. Do you have any thoughts? Would if somebody wanted to become a teacher, would you say go for it?
It's the best job in the world. It absolutely is. It's also the worst job in the world. And it depends purely on where you teach. Why do you want to teach? Some of us want to teach because we love our subject. Some of us want to teach because we like to change lives. Some of us like to teach because we find teenagers hilarious. I think for me, it's a mixture of all those things. And I'm fortunate to have worked in schools where I have a great time because I'm, treated as a professional. I can get on and I can do my subject. It can be more challenging in different schools if you don't have a good leadership team. So I'd say, everyone should give it a go. It's a wonderful profession, and there's so much in it, and we always need more teachers. So the DFE should pay me for doing this kind of recruitment drive for them for free.
I know, I love it. It's good.
This could be sponsored. Maybe you could get one. Maybe if you get any sponsors on your YouTube, you can siphon some of the money my way.
Yeah, well, fund the arts, fund the education system that way.
Absolutely.
If people want to follow you on Twitter and join Edu Twitter, where can they follow you?
I'm at Mr. Cole's Drama.
Incredible. Amazing. Thank you, George. I'm very excited to see you again once all this absolute frobscottle is over.
Absolutely.
And thank you so much for chatting to us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.